Hi, Dr. Regan Robertson, CCO of Productive Dentist Academy here, and I have a question for you. Are you finding it hard to get your team aligned to your vision, but you know you deserve growth just like everybody else? That's why we've created the PDA Productivity Workshop. For nearly 20 years, PDA workshops have helped dentists just like you align their teams, get control of scheduling, and create productive practices that they love walking into every day. Just imagine how you will feel when you know your schedule is productive, your systems are humming, and your team is aligned to your vision. It's simple, but it's not necessarily easy. We can help. Visit productivedentist.com/workshop. That's productivedentist.com/workshop to secure your seats now.
It's really interesting to me how the ego can get into the way of certain daily activities. Like if we're breathing, we're not really thinking about it. That sits in the subconscious. It's a program that runs. We just do it. We never really stop and think about it. And that's that self too, that subconscious. We trust our bodies to breathe and perform essential functions without really thinking about it.
Yep.
However, when it switches into an athletic or a business application, all of a sudden the stakes change and we start thinking about it, which is that conscious mind.
Welcome to the Everyday Practices Podcast. I'm Regan Robertson, and my co-host, Dr. Chad Johnson, and I are on a mission to share the stories of everyday dentists who generate extraordinary results using practical, proven methods you can take right into your own dental practice. If you're ready to elevate patient care and produce results that are anything but ordinary, buckle up and listen in.
Welcome to Everyday Practices Podcast. I am your host, Regan Robertson, here with the ever knowledgeable, ever vast Chad Johnson. Hi, Chad. How you doing?
Keep it coming, Regan. I love flattery. I'm doing well. How are you?
Well, selfishly, I'm very much enjoying our book journey that you have had me cramming. So this week's book, no, don't.
As if you don't need more things to do.
This has kept me on my toes. And in fact, when we get down into lesson 3 of this book, I think that this is really applicable because you should have something to sharpen your sword against. I think it's really good. So I like this. I feel like you've given me a challenge that's doable. So
yes,
for everybody, Audible. You guys get Audible. Put it in your earbuds. And when you're working out, you can get through these books. Yep. I do 1.5 speed, just so you know. Yeah. I can't do 2. 2, I can't process that fast, but I think you do too, don't you, Chad?
No, depending on the book, but a lot of times I'm at 1.5 if I want to think stuff through and 1.8 if I want to get through it. But 2 is like, I want to skim it real quick.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So this week's book is The Inner Game of Tennis by Timothy Gallwey. You read this quite a while ago. It's on your top list of books.
Correct.
And there are 3 lessons that were very intriguing to me as the casual reader. And you really probably have had a chance to put this into play in your own life already.
Yeah, and it's concise. I mean, so the first point that the book makes is that there's 2 selves. And I actually thought of another book that we're going to review, which is by Daniel Kahneman. This book this author is promoted by John Coyce. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow. So anyone who's done Coyce courses, Kahneman is one of the videos that he shows at the beginning of his first course. Thinking Fast and Slow is the book, but Daniel Kahneman uses different verbiage, but he talks about two selves, 2 thought processes. So in the book by Gallwey, there are 2 selves. So one is in charge of when we're our best, and self 1 is when we and hold on a second. And often self 1 only gets in the way. So self 1 is the overthinker. Self 2 is the processor immediately, making a split decision. And so like you can think in tennis, but this book is bigger than tennis, Regan. But the book, about sports application is, that some athletes go, stupid. I should have done better. I need to think harder. I need to consciously think through this. And be stronger to, resolve this. And self two is the subconscious when you're flowing, when you're relaxing, when you're just letting things happen.
It's really interesting to me how the ego can get into the way of certain daily activities. Like if we're breathing, we're not really thinking about it. That sits in the subconscious. It's a program that runs. We just do it. We never really stop and think about it. And that's that self two, that subconscious. We trust our bodies to breathe and perform essential functions without really thinking about it.
Yep.
However, when it switches into an athletic or a business application, all of a sudden the stakes change and we start thinking about it, which is that conscious mind.
Which is probably why doing, for example, even though 10,000 hours isn't the magic bullet number, but you do something enough hours, and then you're letting go of the self one that's always thinking. I really liked in the book how, he was like, when you tell yourself to stop being nervous, does that rarely, or, does that ever work? Rarely, so the idea is that we need to have a different approach and applying pressure to ourselves. Like you get up to the free throw line, me thinking about basketball and being like, okay, I only have 2,000 people in this little, arena watching, and no pressure, because if I hit this, the game, like all those thoughts that are calculating it, it's not going to help.
One of the stories that Timothy told in this first section of the book that I really loved was he was coaching in tennis a gentleman who had been to many coaches, and he went down the path of telling the client, you're swinging too high. And the guy continued to swing too high. And he knew that probably other coaches had told him as well. So he, I believe, recorded him. Timothy, don't quote me on this, but this is what I got from the story. He was able to see. So the client was actually able to see that he was hitting it too high. So he was able to have it mirror and reflected to him. And he went, oh my gosh, I'm hitting it too high. And the coach was a bit befuddled because he was like, I've been telling you this, other coaches have told you this, but something wasn't quite connecting and allowing us. And how many times, like it's in the obstacles way, practicing objectivity. How many times have we told somebody else, you just need to do X, Y, Z, and they hear it and they say, yep, I get it. And then they don't seem to change. I know for bowling, for me, when I watch myself, I don't watch myself bowling, but when I'm bowling and I'll notice, oh my gosh, that went too far to the left. That went too far. So next time, Reagan, don't do it to the left. And then I do it even more to the left. And I'm really frustrated. I'm like, why? I told myself. And that's, I think, a great example of the self one and self two is how he explains it is you can tell yourself, don't do it to the left. And then often what happens is the opposite of what we want. So it either continues or it even gets worse.
Yes.
And that's because you are not trusting self two, which is that subconscious level where you're in the flow and you are relaxing. And that was the same applied for me when I did dance for so many years. If I thought about every single step I was going to have to make before I was in the public eye, so before I was on stage, if I obsessed about it right before I went on, guaranteed I would be making a mistake.
Yeah. So
I had to figure out how to do the opposite of that.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of this book is our summary that you and I established for the listeners is quite concise. But the book really is fascinating. Shall we do lesson 2 from the book?
So, yes. Quick summary. Lesson 1. Self 1 is your conscious mind. That's the mind that tells you, like, for example, I'm going to really place that implant well. I am going to turn my hand, whatever degree it has to turn. And the result is, unfortunately, you don't turn your hand the right way and the implant gives you trouble. Why is that? It's because you are letting self 1, your conscious mind, control your talent, as it were, because you really should be letting your subconscious self 2 in control. You need to trust it. That is lesson number 1.
I'll be transparent. So I just got a manual vehicle. And so as I'm getting used to driving the stick, I'm normally flowing pretty well after the first week, unless someone's right on me at a stop sign. And then I'm thinking, oh no, I got to get moving. Okay, don't kill it. Don't kill it. Okay. Oh, I killed it. Yep. And so it's funny how
perfect example of
it's a perfect example, because a lot of my life, I think I'm in the flow And then that's an example where I'm learning something new and I'm like, oh, don't kill it. Oh, crud. I just did the very thing that I was hoping not to do. So, yep. Relax, go in the flow, use your subconscious. It's stuff you've heard before, but now it's just like, no, the science is proving it. So, lesson 2, basically he talks about being in the zone, and he calls the author calls it out of mind. And so we don't want to get stuck in our own head. And so when there's we assume that there's a repeatable process that we can use to get into that zone, but that's not really the case. So what we can do, however, is to resolve this inner conflict is to quiet self 1 and trust self 2. So now that we've defined self 1 and self 2, your goal isn't to be, to go, don't mess up, don't mess up, don't mess up. It's just, okay, just, go in the trust zone, and as opposed to the counterproductive scolding yourself. Your thoughts?
So I'll tell you my hack for lesson 2. And I'm looking for additional tools to quiet the self. I meditate daily. I love that. I'll tell you though, for public speaking, which has been quite a battle for me over the years, but now I have no problem. I seem to have no problem with my confidence level of it. So I'll tell you what I do. My little hack is, of course, by saying that, now I'm letting voice 1 take over, aren't I?
Nah, you're good.
Just teasing.
Okay. I was like, no, come on, share.
The hack that I do is I tell my brain I've prepared as much as I can. So if I truly believe it, I have to believe it, Chad. I have prepared as much as I can. That's it. That is all I can do. Whatever happens up there on stage, that was actually how I got out of my fear with dance and messing up in dance too. So I probably unintentionally pulled that same particular tool forward. I've practiced as much as I can. There is nothing more I can humanly do. You have to trust yourself, and thinking about it is going to give you the opposite result. So I adopted that in dance after a few failed attempts pretty early on. For speaking, the same thing. I've prepared as much as I can. I have to just leave it. I've left it all out on the field. What shows up is what will show up. And my other big tip with that is my inspirational quote from Bruce Baird that he started, I don't know, over a decade when I met him. He said, just tell them, just share with people what you know. Just tell them what you know. Mm-hmm. So if I wouldn't tattoo it, but that would be something that I've written down many, many times over the years. Just tell them what you know, and it relaxes me. So I think it quiets self 1 and allows me to trust self 2, because it reminds me, I know what I know. That's okay. You're just sharing what you know. You're not sharing what you don't know. So for public speaking, that's exactly how I'm able to quiet self 1 so I can trust self 2.
I like it. Keeping rolling. Lesson 3 of 3. Lesson 3 is the inner game isn't limited to tennis or sports in general. It matters everywhere in life. And again, this isn't rocket science, but he's just saying, the inner game of tennis in this book, why would you read this if you don't play tennis? When the last time I've played tennis? Your guess is as good as mine. I don't know. But I found this book to be fascinating because of this very principle. The third principle is that this book isn't about sports or whatever. It is, but it applies everywhere in life. So, being able to, he talks about as children, what he called, or, what he explained as implicit learning is that when we observe and then we just try it on our own as kids, you don't over intellectualize everything. You don't, you can't master the verbal skills of how to describe it. And normally in dentistry, I think of, mastery as being able to explain it and to do it and stuff like that and teach others how to do it. But this actually is no, it's simpler than that. You're children just implicitly learn by observing and then just do it. And they go, you just do it, Dad. You just do it,
I love the childlike reference, because Timothy does say that our brains tend to not take credit when we're actually in our flow state and we're just doing it and we don't have an explanation for how we do it, which is another trick into getting us into that self 1. Whereas children, we don't have anything to prove. I think that's, to me, that connection there. So when we memorize the skill, we're not doing it to necessarily impress others. And we don't, it's not like a career where our job is to then pass on that knowledge also. So we're allowed to ease up on ourselves a little bit.
So I was in high school and I was job shadowing a guy on the other side of town, Greg Sarasso. He's retired in the last couple of years, but I asked him, I was like, how do you drill backwards in a mirror? Like, are you thinking the reverse, or like, are you thinking I'm pushing to the left while you're drilling to the left? Or are you thinking pushing to the right while you're pushing to the left? Like, how does that work? And he was like, I don't know. You just do it. Mm-hmm. And it was later, either that day or that week, that I thought, wait a second, when I comb my hair in the mirror, I don't overprocess it. You kind of just do it. Now, if you've ever watched a 3 or 4-year-old use a comb, it's not like it goes easy, but right. I thought it's got to be that easy to a dentist someday to drill backwards in a mirror as much as when I comb my hair. And that kind of, I don't know, like solidified to me that it's just like, okay, someday I'll be able to do it because, like you'll just figure it out and, don't overthink it, just do it. Is
it quantum physics, quantum mechanics, and which does is it Schrödinger cat? I can't remember. I can never pronounce it.
Schrader's cat.
Schrader's cat.
Yes.
The whole summation of this is you can't focus directly on it. Like focusing directly on what you want in this application actually makes you perform worse.
Correct.
And the goal is to get yourself out of that mindset. So you're not directly looking at what it is that you want to improve your performance.
Yes. Yep. It's funny too, sometimes when I'm suturing, like this morning, I had 3 wisdom teeth cases and while I'm suturing and stuff, I'm talking about other stuff. And it's almost, maybe it's my brain's way of just oversimplifying the difficulty of the matter. Hey, so let me read this quote, if you don't mind, that I found in chapter 9 that the listeners will find interesting. So in this use of competition, it is the duty of your opponent to create the greatest possible difficulties for you. So this sounds a lot like our book. What was it, Regan? The Obstacle is the Way, Ryan Holiday. Okay. Mm-hmm. Just as it is yours to try and create obstacles for him, only by doing this do you give each other the opportunity to find out to what heights each can rise. So I arrived, this is still part of the quote. So I arrived at the starting conclusion that true competition is identical to true cooperation. Each player tries his hardest to defeat the other, but in this use of competition, it isn't the other person we are defeating. It is simply a matter of overcoming the obstacles he presents. In true competition, no person is defeated. Both players benefit by their efforts to overcome the obstacles presented by the other, like 2 bulls butting their heads against each other. Both grow stronger and each participates in the development of the other.
Oh, that just blows my mind.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
Well, it's trust and it's trust. So if you have another person to sharpen that sword against that you trust, you can go much further. So when I look at my very close relationships, they are built on trust and respect. And so what could come off as adversarial, the whole dynamic completely changes. And I love it when very similar to you and I discussing in last week's podcast, BMS versus traction. And I'm thinking it's going to be like a throwdown. And we get to the end of it and I'm like, oh my gosh, we can see the pros and cons of both of these. But when you have a lot of trust established, you can really truly take something to its fullest potential. So you have a safe space to evaluate without emotion. And the book does talk about that, being able to evaluate objectively without throwing the ego and the emotion into it. So, for me, when I think about that, the biggest takeaway is how can you build that internal to yourself? So you've got to trust yourself.
Yeah. So, for example, my wife gets mad at me. Sarah will get mad at me when we're watching a game and we're supposed to be rooting for the team that we like. But the other team, if they do something good, I go, oh man, that was good. And she gets so mad. Good. Yes, but she gets mad because she's like, no. For example, last night we watched the women's national team play Sweden for the women's World Cup in soccer. And and Sweden was bringing the ball down and put it in the corner and kicked a cross over to the other side. So they were crossing it. And I was like, oh man, that was good. She burned, that other player. And my daughter and Sarah, they were like, what, why are you saying that? Like, we're supposed to be. And I was like, listen, it was just purely awesome athleticism there. Like, I can't not do that. Like, I'll even, if there's a team that I really like, but then the other, the best player on the other team does something really good, even if I can't stand them or something like that, I'll be like, man, that was good. And most people won't go so out loud to say that, but I even remember back, playing varsity ball, that if another player on another team did something good, I'd run down the court and, saying, dude, that was actually awesome. And it helped me realize, that the other player should be playing his hardest. I don't want them playing patty cakes with us. I don't want the other team to be, only throwing me lob balls and stuff like that. And then what? So someone could think short-sighted. Well, yeah, you do. Then you'll win the game. Yeah, but then what? Yeah.
It's easy to observe. Well, one, people get super passionate about sports, so I can see why Sarah would be not thrilled when you have an alliance with a particular team. I think the game changes dramatically when you throw in a career or a livelihood and you up the stakes so that it really does matter. And so,
for example, like if I have a dentist down the street that is my competition, I actually just go, bring it on. It's like Fight Club, but we can't talk about it, right, Regan?
Yes. Again, I think you have to be very, very firm in your own identity, trust yourself, be able to pull apart the essence of who you are away from the outcome of what you're trying to accomplish. That is I'm looking forward to the other books that we read. And listeners, if you have advice on how you're able to remove your identity from your job title, or how you perceive that you bring value to the world so that you can calm your ego down, I think that's a really compelling and provocative topic, because if it's a game where the stakes are very low, I think it is easy to get into the flow state a little bit easier. But when you pull in career and things that affect your livelihood, it can be a little bit trickier, but it's not impossible at all. Once you're in it, this book really will make you think about that and ask you to define things. And it was backed up with some pretty interesting science. So thank you for the book read.
You're welcome. And I liked that Timothy, the author, said that this is a non-self-help book, because a self-help book would be teaching you to overanalyze and to overthink stuff. And he's like, this book is actually a non-self-help book. So if you don't like self-help books, this book might be for you.
Thank you so much, Chad.
You're welcome, Regan. Thanks, listeners. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Everyday Practices Podcast. Chad and I are here every week thanks to our community of listeners just like you, and we'd love your help. It would mean the world if you can help spread the word by sharing this episode with a fellow dentist and leave us a review on iTunes or Spotify. Do you have an extraordinary story you'd like to share, or feedback on how we can make this podcast even more awesome? Drop us an email at podcast@productivedentist.com. And don't forget to check out our other podcasts from Productive Dentist Academy at productivedentist.com/podcasts. See you next week.